Welcome to another episode of The State of School with me, Mason Rickard. This is episode 3, and we are going to be looking further into the consequences on school of the coronavirus outbreak in the UK.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Mason. So another week, a lot's happened across every industry, especially education. I think younger people are starting to almost settle into some weird new existence, and perhaps starting to come to terms with the change that's happened, and that it's not just a half term or something, that this is actually happening. So what is the new information? Tell me a little bit about how has it developed in the last week?
So we finally got the guidelines from Ofqual, which is the main education board, as to how exams will be graded, how they'll be analysed and how they'll be produced. So by the 29th of May, teachers have to submit a centre assessment grade for every student and in each of their subjects. So what this looks like is that the grade will be what they think that the student will most likely have received and achieved if they had sat their exams and completed non-exam assessments. Now, the evidence which will make up these judgments come from a variety of different sources now. So classwork, bookwork, non-exam assessments, whether or not complete. So that's a bit of a interesting one. And also mock results. So overall, there's some sort of stronger piece of evidence, you could say, and some weaker. For example, classwork and bookwork. How are they going to judge what that determines into a grade? Whereas mocks and sort of predicted grades, they seem a lot more solid and a lot more sort of assured in terms of what they have. They're more practical almost. Not only this, they have to put students in a ranking order for their grade in each of their subjects. So this means that, for example, if at one school in one subject, a teacher submits three lots of B grades, for example, in one subject, they then have to rank 1 to 3 those students. So ranked number 1 would be the student who they think would be most likely to secure or have that highest attainment in that grade. And then the third one would be the one they had the least. And then there's questions about how is that determined? Is that going to be very subjective, possibly? How do they try and maintain this objectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And do you think that by doing this, it potentially opens up the system to sort of teach a student bias, where up until now you will sit an exam and it will go and be marked by somebody who has no idea who you are, whether they like you, whether you're naughty in class or whatever, and now the teacher that knows those students is essentially deciding that student's grade. Do you think that opens up to a certain amount of bias?
I mean, this has been the speculation since even before Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, announced these changes a couple of weeks ago. It brings these sort of fears, especially towards students, of am I going to be judged fairly and holistically, rather than it being sort of a payback? I mean, there's lots of people saying that there's a lot of karma going around, but that's not fair to say, because students work in different ways, and come exams, students really are able, so most students are able to sort of pull it out the bag in those high tense and high pressure situations. So yeah, there's a lot of, obviously they are trying to make it as fair as possible, and if the teachers are doing their role and being a teacher, they will put aside the bias of favouring students and actually think about their grades and their futures.
Yeah, amazing. So and I'm sure that will probably come together as it's evolved a lot in the last week, from how are they going to get the grades to they're going to do this and this, and this is how they're going to get that final grade. And I'm sure that will probably be become more clear, even more clear in the coming weeks. In terms of the student-teacher relationship now, there's no students in school. The teachers are most likely working from home as much as possible as well. Is there a way that students and teachers can still communicate about those final grades, about the work that they may or may not have to do, and about their sort of route forward in life in general? Because that teacher-student relationship is very important for a lot of young people. So how are teachers communicating with their students?
Yeah, certainly. There's such a relationship between the teacher and the student. And I mean, if you think about it, some of these students have known their teachers for up to 7 years. And they probably formed, especially an intellectual connection,
Yeah.
but also sort of for advice and guidance. But with regards to the work side of it, there are no requirements now, Ofqual have outlined, for there to be set any additional mock exams or homework tasks for the purposes of determining a centre assessment grade. So no students should be disadvantaged by completing any work set after the schools have been closed as of a few weeks ago. Now, when this was announced, all this new information, that it was confirmed, because last week we were talking a lot about teachers were setting work for one subject but not for another. When it was confirmed on the 3rd of April that this shouldn't happen, I put a poll on my Instagram page, of which the first 100 people, 81% said that they were still being set work by their teachers who were doing A-levels or GCSEs. So this shows up to that date, there was a huge number still of teachers who were pushing it. But obviously on their side at the same time, they didn't know what to do. Imagine if the exam board still said, oh, you have to still teach these things, they'd have to catch up. So obviously, hopefully that was a few days ago. And hopefully by now that would have gone down the amount of work that we're setting. But yeah, it's all about sort of trying to make sure that they're sort of protecting sort of them as a centre and as a school. But when we're talking about the grades as well, they can't share any grades. That has been outlined as a no-no. So teachers cannot share grades. This is to firstly protect the integrity of the student centre. So literally each school is just called a centre when it comes to exam. So it's to protect the integrity of their judgments, to avoid anyone feeling pressured, any teachers feeling pressured into submitting a grade potentially, which isn't supported by the evidence.
Right.
Not only this, but it will help manage student expectations, because obviously when the teachers submit their grades, that's not the grade, that may not be the grade which the student receives, because it has to go through the standardization process by the different exam boards. So it lowers those expectations of a student thinking, oh, the teacher said this, so I must get that.
Right. Okay, so even though the teacher is pretty much presenting all of the evidence for that final grade, it may change once it's passed along to the exam boards, because they need to kind of normalize the grades across the whole of the UK, and that can change grades for certain students, both in their favour and not in their favour. So exactly. It's essentially getting their results early is what they're trying to stop happening. Exactly. Because they don't know what those grades are going to be.
And holding people's hopes up, potentially.
Yeah.
And if they don't get those grades,
Right. And I think that's very interesting for the majority of students that sit exams, because it's a new way, it's a very new way of thinking for students who are used to the exams. You study, you revise, and then you sit an exam and you get your grade back. But there are thousands of students that don't sit exams in the form of BTECs or whatever it is, apprenticeships, things like that. General sort of non-exam ways of learning. What is happening with non-exam assessments at the moment?
Well, this is interesting, and this is something that I haven't touched on as much over the past few weeks, but lots of people have been asking me to, because obviously not everyone takes A-levels and A-levels really after post-GCSE. There's loads of different options, but the Ofqual have advised that schools and colleges do not need to ask students to complete any unfinished non-exam assessment work for the purposes of grading. So that sort of brings the idea and the suggestion that they will be taking it more on your classwork, your book work, sort of previous examinations and judgments from that. And that obviously that can still apply to A-levels with regards to coursework potentially. So that's a non-exam assessment. But yeah, so that has been a contentious issue. And to be honest, I don't think they've expressed enough with regards to this non-exam assessments, and what that means, because some courses are heavily dependent on it. So it raises the question of how are they going to be sort of assessed fully and fairly too.
Yeah, and I think even on a granular level, a few years ago I was studying computer science as a BTEC, and back then there was no exam. I think there is an exam now as part of it, but back then there was nothing set in stone. You just did the coursework and you submitted it at the end. And what that allowed some students to do was work at a different pace.
Yeah.
So by the time we got to April, I think me and a few others had actually completed the entire course, whereas a few of them had only done 6 out of 12 units or whatever it was that they had to do. So they were a lot further behind in terms of the quantity of their work and the studying that they had done, even within the same class. So people sitting non-exam or very heavily coursework based courses, they may be at a completely different place to their classmates. And I suppose that the challenge there is, and the challenge for the government to sort of figure out, is how do you take a student that's on exactly the same course as their classmate, but has done less work, and give them a fair grade compared to someone who's working at a faster pace, which is kind of what these courses were designed around in the first place, to allow that flexibility with people who might not be as academic. What do you think of that? Do you have any ideas of how they're going to do that? How they're going to formalize that final assessment for non-exam assessments?
Well, the first logical thing which would come to my head is to tell those students, the students who have obviously done lots of work, to sort of lay back, and for those people who haven't, to catch up. But the dilemma with that is that they've now said that anything since lockdown isn't going to be taken into account. So I think they're going to be issuing grades which are highly, I don't want to say inaccurate, but unfair to that extent, especially for BTECs and sort of non-exam assessment subjects and qualifications, because they've almost stopped that route of potentially making it fair. And this affects thousands of people as well, thousands of young people.
It does. You're right. And of course, every single year there is this one event that everybody kind of nervously looks forward to, which is exam results day. And you all go to school and you flap your bits of paper and you either cry or you are laughing and happy about that you finally got the grades you wanted, or most people somewhere in between there. What's going to happen with exam results? Is there going to be one day? Are they going to come out slowly depending on what you studied? What's going to happen?
So we don't know whether it will be us personally collecting them in school, or whether it will be digitalized in terms of what we see. But what we do know is that they have assured us that the results day will not be delayed. So the initial and original expectations was for the 13th of August for A-level results, and the 20th of August for GCSE results. That will not be delayed. In fact, they're trying to bring it forward a little bit, the dates, but they've been extremely sort of vague on that, because I don't think they want to guarantee something which they can't. So that's sort of still up to questions, but it is a nice idea that we could be getting our results slightly soon, especially due to the fact that we're going to be locked down inside for quite a bit.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this year is going to be looked back at by everybody in society as a weird one. In terms of, I'm very interested to see, how does industry, when they're going to hire someone, how do universities, but also people going directly into work, what do their grades mean? Are they going to be completely ignored? My personal opinion is that your actual final grade only makes up really a tiny fraction of what that person is capable of. And that if somebody's got an F in, for example, computer science, but they spend their entire life coding, are more likely to hire that person than somebody who's got an A but hasn't got a clue what they're doing. This might lead to a shift in how people hire and how people evaluate how well a student is at that task based on the work that they've put in. And I think that might be a positive that comes out of this chaos, that is, maybe it will lead people, not just the government, but also industry and universities, to evaluate people slightly differently, based on their actual interest and their actual input rather than just a number or a letter. And obviously, I hope that that is true. I hope that it does improve how people are evaluated. My favorite quote of all time is Albert Einstein's, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, the fish will believe it's stupid. Which is kind of relevant. And
It's
I
very
really,
true.
it is
Yeah,
true. It is true.
it is.
Right. So sort of wrapping up, we're coming on to half term. Which I don't know whether that's as relevant now because everybody's at home anyway. A bit of a weird one, but it is also nice outside. And of course, now we have thousands of students who want to see their friends, who are making half-term plans, who want to get out and see their mates, and are also probably at this point, we're 3 weeks in, missing their mates, missing that physical interaction with their friends. Do you think that the half term is going to encourage people to break the lockdown maybe?
Sadly, I do. I do think that there may be some students, particularly those who may still be in education rather than the GCSE and A-level students. So they're still at home doing their hours, but online. So when it comes to the half term, it might be 1 or 2 weeks off for some students. And schools have, despite them being at home already, schools have made it definitive, well, most schools have, that students will get that time off. They won't be studying any work over the half term. So this will, I mean, it's inevitable that it will encourage some people to go outside, which is sort of a sad factor because obviously it is risking so many people from catching this COVID-19 virus. So all we can do is try and make sure that we are responsible for our actions and that we encourage one another not to go out. I mean, over the weekend, it's been a beautiful weekend, this Saturday and Sunday. And there have been reports that some people are turning off their snap maps on Snapchat to try and go off with their friends, their loved ones or something, to try and meet up. And it's becoming it's dangerous. And despite young people thinking they may be invincible, not all at all. It's a small minority, but we are not invincible still to this virus, and we need to remember that. I mean, a 13-year-old died just last week. I believe there was a 17 and an 18-year-old who also passed away due to this virus. We are not invincible. And we need to remember that. It's our responsibility and also our parents' responsibility as well for those younger people. We need to make sure we look out for one another.
I totally agree with that. I think young people aren't invincible, and also that they may live with someone who might be worse affected if they transmit the virus. But you touched on something there, which is parents obviously have a responsibility to make sure that their kids don't break the law, but also schools. What sort of responsibility do schools have over encouraging students to stay at home? Is there much of that going on?
I don't believe so, honestly. I mean, it seems as if now, it's almost as if the students are slipping out of the school's hands. Their jurisdiction is slipping. It's inevitable in these times that when the students are home, they're not in the premises of a school. They're not under the enforcement of the teachers and therefore the rules. So I feel like the responsibility then goes into the hands of the adults. But obviously this is really difficult because the adults are obviously still working. The parents are working. Most parents don't have a half term for themselves. Normally the bank holiday maybe, but the whole half term maybe not. So there are issues with that. And I guess it's the responsibility of the school once they then go back into the online term, shall we say, to then sort of pick up the momentum and sort of try and encourage students, because they can't enforce it by giving punishments out. They have to encourage them and try and work with them rather than against them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think while staying at home is so crucial and so important, it is also important that we are looking after our bodies regardless of whether we have the virus or not. Obviously, you want to boost your immune system, and you also want to keep, especially younger kids, from getting bored. So what are some ways that young people can stay fit and healthy while in isolation? Have you seen any examples of some great things that young people have been doing, or do you have any ideas of your own?
I mean, all over the news recently, like morning news, there have been a lot of sort of shout outs to Joe Wicks, who is a fitness guru, almost fitness expert. And he's been doing a lot of YouTube videos called PE with Joe. And that's really helped, especially young people, those sort of like pre-teens and stuff, to sort of get involved. But not only that, it's also involved families and sort of united them in terms of sort of just like having fun. It's a really fun way of just getting involved and getting fit. So that's more sort of on a sort of national scale, if you sort of see it that way, because he's got this platform, and he's reaching out to lots of young people. There's another sort of more local hero, shall we say, Charlotte Saunders, who has sort of taken the liberty of her performing arts and fitness sort of skills to reach out on her Instagram page, on her Facebook, and to try and encourage people to keep fit by doing daily exercises since the lockdown started. This morning she was starred on Gymshark's Facebook page, which is a big fashion brand for gym wear. So lots of people are trying to do their bit to sort of encourage people, because not only does it affect your physical health, but also your mental health. And that's something we really need to make sure we keep a positive balance of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today, Mason. I think we've pretty much covered all of your questions. Do you have anything else to add that you'd like to discuss?
No, just stay at home.
Right. Well, we'll talk next week then.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.